Hi, welcome to another episode of Atkins Diet. This week's episode has to do with a topic that occasionally comes up from time to time. Atkins Diet is sometimes referred to as a high sodium diet, or that one really has to be careful about their sodium intake on the Atkins Diet. And I want to go into a little bit about the role of sodium and why it may or may not be important to track within an Atkins Diet. Well, the first obvious clue about sodium is it's one of the major electrolytes that the body has in it. And as Atkins Diet has a temporary diuretic effect, especially during the first few days, one might be losing, in addition to the additional water within the muscle cells that is bound to the glycogen molecules, you might be also losing some of the electrolytes within the body, and which leads to somewhat the induction flu symptoms that many people experience within the first few days. One of the suggestions is to add some additional electrolytes in the form of chicken broth or just additional salt into one's diet to alleviate some of those effects. However, I'll copy what Dr. Atkins said, is have 1 cup of chicken broth mid-morning or mid-afternoon, measure out the salt and sprinkle it on the food throughout the day, or season the food with soy sauce. Follow this regimen from day one, and one should be spared any of the problematic symptoms. And no, this does not make Atkins Diet a high sodium diet. So what does indeed classify a diet as high sodium? And the USDA, the original recommendations was 2,400 milligrams per day for a 2,000 calorie diet. The current American Heart Association recommendation is no more than 1,500 milligrams per day. And to give you some idea what that looks like, a half a teaspoon of salt is 1,200 milligrams. A full teaspoon of salt is 2,400 milligrams. Well, you might be saying, well, I certainly don't sprinkle a full teaspoon of salt on my food every day. And the answer is typically commercially prepared foods is the source for most, about 80% of the intake of sodium is from commercially processed foods. As you know, on the Atkins Diet, Dr. Atkins recommended eating real food or preparing one's food, i.e. shopping around the exterior of the grocery store as opposed to particularly purchasing processed food items. So thereby, if one is indeed shopping the vegetable aisle, the meat aisle, the dairy aisle, one's typically not getting the same load of sodium that other people are necessarily getting. But let's understand what the effects of a high sodium diet are. Well, the first and easy one to recognize or understand if you're having it happen is a typical bloating feeling or a water retention. Your body feels just a little bit puffy. You know, you push on your skin and and you can feel that the your tissues are holding in water, and they're puffier than they possibly should be. Ankles is another key or critical one where you'll see this puffiness around the ankles as the blood doesn't get returned to the heart. The fluids don't return into the system quite as much, and they start pooling in the lower extremities. The second one is, as one retains this water, your volume of your blood indeed goes up, and that volume of the blood leads to an increased blood pressure, i.e. your heart has to work that much harder to push the blood through the body, and that can indeed lead to many heart diseases or heart attacks as one wears out the heart prematurely. And finally, as the excess sodium intake, it can also lead to certain other electrolytes such as calcium and potassium indeed leaving the body. So indeed, if you're leaching those things out of your muscles, out of your body, you can certainly see the induction flu symptoms, or you can even, if you're a woman, potentially see some osteoporosis events by the time you hit 50 and 60 years old. So do followers of the Atkins Diet need to be concerned about their sodium intake? Most perhaps do not. Evaluate yourself for the danger signs and act accordingly. What do you do if you're one of the unfortunate few on the Atkins Diet that indeed needs to improve their blood pressure or need to reduce their hypertension medicine? Potentially eat more natural and unprocessed foods like I mentioned before. You're typically not, as you're cooking the food or eating the food, putting on the majority of the sodium into one's diet. It's typically that processed food. So if you work more towards making your own food, chances are your sodium intake is going to go down. You might also think about transitioning to a light salt or a no salt alternative, which replaces some of the sodium intake with potentially potassium chloride on a 1-to-1 or a 100% basis. That's, you might have seen in my electrolyte video, as one of my recommendations for runners is to use this no salt, which gives you 600 milligrams of potassium, which should help you replenish your potassium intake. Finally, reduce the amount of salt used in personal cooking process. That simply goes without saying that if you use less salt, you'll potentially be utilizing less salt. And finally, reduce the amount of salty snacks like pork rinds. There are certainly many salty snacks on the Atkins diet. If you're one of those people that are potentially sensitive to sodium, you might want to think about finding other potential sources of snacks. Leave out the processed meats, leave out the pork rinds and those sorts of processed meats and cheeses, and you'll be much better. Well, I hope this reaches everyone in great health. I have another awesome recipe video coming in the next few days. I'm sure you guys are going to like it. I'll see you guys then. Bye.